So we've got David Banks here from Veterans for Britain. Thank you so much for talking to us. My first question is, do you think that the European Union will create an EU army?
Yes, it will. It's plotted out how it's going to do that in a few years' time, but what they're doing at the moment is the sort of predecessor manoeuvres to getting that in place.
And what would an EU army look like? Why would it be a bad thing in your opinion?
Because of who's controlling it. It's not particularly democratic, and because of the way that it's been put together. Having military output done democratically and in a way that's accountable is really essential, because people need to know who carries the can when their loved one is killed in a conflict.
And can you just explain very, very quickly how the plan is for there to be an EU army by 2024?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so common defence they call it. They always use clever language to try to avoid the most explosive types of phrases. So they always avoid EU army. They call it common defence. This is seen in the Lisbon Treaty. Common defence is a unitary military for the European Union under a single line of command. And Mr. Juncker said in September last year that that will be formed by the end of 2024. He always formulates three options, and then they always go for the worst, the strongest option. But common defence by 2024 is the sort of full fat option that the EU has proposed.
Nick Clegg would accuse you of creating a dangerous fantasy, as he did to Nigel Farage in 2014. What do you say to Remainers who just say you're just making all this stuff up?
They're wrong. It's preposterous, because the people that they believe in and they follow in Brussels, who are putting together the architecture of this EU project, are saying something completely different. They only need to cross the channel and go to Brussels, go to some of the EU Parliament and plenary meetings, whatever they call them, to hear some of this language.
And also, some Remainers would say that, look, what's so wrong with an EU army? Even maybe Britain should join, because we need to be part of a bigger defence force. It would make everyone safer. So what is so wrong with it? I don't understand this, because lots of people would say that having a bigger defence force where people are cooperating more will make everyone's lives more safer.
Well, the fact is we've already got it, and it's called NATO, and it comes with the backup of the United States, which is really essential, because without the US we wouldn't have the weight to be able to deter some of Europe's detractors. And to try to create a duplicating structure would appear to threaten NATO. They've created 20 separate structures which directly duplicate, or have the potential to duplicate, what NATO already does. And that's quite unhealthy, those of us who believe in NATO.
Are the EU trying to undermine NATO?
They've actively done so quite regularly. If you look at the words of Mr. Juncker again, he has persistently told US presidents to pipe down when they've asked European countries a very simple request to fund NATO and their contribution to NATO properly. So yes, they are detracting. And they've done several other things that detract from NATO, not just the structural duplication that I mentioned before, but a kind of a concealment of their activity, which, when you look at what they're doing, what is under that concealment, it's an effort to push forward on their own strategic autonomy, they call it. Autonomy from NATO, that's the specific wording that's found in the EU agreements of 2017. And to do that in such an underhanded way, and such careful lexicon which can throw people off the scent, they're clearly detracting and undermining NATO.
So Donald Trump obviously came to Europe for a NATO summit a few weeks ago, and he created quite an uproar. He said that NATO members need to pay their way. Now obviously Britain just about pays its 2% in GDP on defence. Do you think that European nations are spending enough on defence?
No, they're not. We found out recently, just in the last few days, that Germany only has 4 serviceable fighter aircraft. That's just ridiculous. The UK does just about pay its way, as you say, but that's, according to MPs, is by some quite clever accounting methods.
They include pensions in it, I think.
That's right, yeah. So the UK needs to be doing far more. At the moment, there is, I believe, I'm told, just about enough expenditure to retain the kind of skills and assets to be able to expand when it's required. But it's really important for the UK to be able to keep a peacetime capability, so that if things do turn nasty, we're able to respond. You're quite right, other European countries do not invest enough. For Germany, for instance, it's less than half of what it should be.
And do you think Donald Trump is right to come to NATO and say, look, we're bailing out these European countries? Because some people say, look, the United States aren't bailing anyone out. They're not. Germany doesn't owe the United States anything. And a very technical piece of language there. Do you think Donald Trump's right that Germany actually owes the US all this money?
Yes, I think he is. It's difficult to evaluate, and it's hard to actually expect realistically that the Germans and other European countries are going to stump up and repay. It's probably not going to happen, but they need to at least start to recognise that there is a debt. Now, this is a direct debt to US and British taxpayers. So British and American taxpayers have been effectively subsidising the expenditure of Germany, France, Italy, every underpaying NATO contributor for decades. So that has a direct impact on the lives and services and activities of governments that do contribute.
So Jeremy Hunt is obviously the new Foreign Secretary after Boris Johnson resigned, and he said on Twitter the other day that a no-deal Brexit would be the best thing for Vladimir Putin. Now, what do you think about that? Do you think a no-deal would be, Putin would be really happy with a no-deal?
No, I don't. I think it's a preposterous remark. It's the kind of thing that Remainers always fall back on when they're utterly desperate. It's the sort of default insult and defamation of the Leave campaign. It's been argued by academics that actually the supposed support for Brexit that Putin has was maskirovka, which is a common military Russian deception. You say one thing in order to actually make your enemy believe that you're going in a certain direction when actually you're throwing them in a different direction. Putin would want the EU to continue on the ridiculous path it's going down now because it assists Putin. Juncker's military developments, all of the agreements and structures that they've created simply play into the hands of Putin. If people in politics and in Parliament knew more about the vast structures and agreements that have been created in the last year and a half, then they would know how much it detracts from NATO, how much it undermines the integrity of the Western alliance, and how much it actually does Putin favours. We shouldn't be doing Putin favours. We should be maintaining a more linear and effective deterrence.
Would a World Trade Organization Brexit be good for UK defence?
Yes, it would, because just one example out of the air is that WTO terms on defence procurement are actually far more favourable to the United Kingdom than the EU's terms. What the EU does is it gilds the lily of what already exists in WTO terms. Defence procurement rules in WTO terms are called the GPA, and it falls under government procurement rules. What the EU does is it says, right, we're a signatory to the GPA, but we're going to take the freedom that GPA signatories have and eradicate it within our borders, within the EU's borders. So if you want to do defence procurement work, you have to subscribe to EU rules and do an EU-wide tender for instance, building a fleet auxiliary ship. It would be an instant win for British shipyards, British defence companies, if the UK were in GPA instead of EU rules.
So just to put that in layman's terms, essentially if we were on WTO rules, British companies could choose their own contracts worldwide rather than European, EU-based contracts. So, so basically the UK would have a lot more freedom to be able to negotiate contracts around the world in terms of defence rather than just sticking to the EU. Is that right?
Yes, there'd be more freedom for companies because they wouldn't be mandated to go for EU-wide alliances. There'd be far more freedom for the UK government to send its contracts domestically to the UK for anything defence related. And this is what America does, this is what Japan and South Korea and many others do. They keep their defence contracts in-house when they want to, when they feel it's beneficial to their domestic and strategic defence industry. And this is the important thing, that a defence industry for any company is a strategic asset. And the UK would retain the scope to be able to cooperate with the US far more than it would be doing if it was tied into EU regulations and structures and directives.
Thank you so much, David Banks, for that interesting interview.